And also Dalia Gebrial from the student campaign group People and Planet. Very good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
At the start of the working week, and Sebastian, the papers, of course, all talking about Brexit once again. It's budget week as well this week. The Times headline, May to offer more in Brexit divorce deal.
So this morning, on Monday, we've got the meeting of the inner Brexit cabinet. These are the 10 key cabinet ministers who will decide what the Brexit deal looks like. And what they're going to discuss is, can Mrs May put forward more money for this settlement? Because the Brexit talks, essentially, they're in standstill. They're not making any progress. To unlock those talks means to put forward more money, because in her Florence speech back in September, the Prime Minister said that we will pay for our past commitments, but nothing about the future commitments. So this group's going to meet this morning. They will hopefully all agree to put forward more money, and if that happens, then the talks will unlock at that crucial summit coming up in December. Then, if they can move on to the phase after the divorce proceedings and talk about the future relationship, there'll be a big sigh of relief from everyone. And the key story here in the Times is that most of the cabinet are behind this, including those crucial figures, Michael Gove and Boris Johnson, who are signed up to this as long as there is clarity about what we're getting for the money.
You say there's going to be a big sigh of relief, but people around the country, if Theresa May suddenly says that we're going to give them another 20 billion, there's going to be uproar, isn't there?
So I think this is a real problem for the government. There's been no pitch rolling at all for paying this Brexit bill. You know, if you remember during the referendum, nobody said, oh, that's going to be a 45 billion hit to the economy in 1 year. And there was some polling out quite recently that showed that the only sum that voters found acceptable was £10 billion. We're now talking 40, 50 billion. So how that's going to go down is pretty interesting. You know, of course, you can massage it. You can say that there's 20 billion for things that, you know, we had to pay that anyway, past commitments. Then there's extra 20 billion. It's for things we owe in the future. It's in Britain's interest to pay this. So, yes, you can sell it, but I think there might be something of a backlash, particularly when you think about the NHS, public services, education, could all really do with that money, and frittering away this cost to get the Brexit talks moving is a big ask.
Well, the clock is certainly ticking, so we do need some sort of resolution on it. Dalia, let's turn to the I newspaper and the story that amazed everyone, I think, last night. Mugabe clinging on to power.
Yes, so we have a very interesting situation unfolding in Zimbabwe. There was an ultimatum for Mugabe to resign by the weekend. There was a lot of expectation that he would. He did a state televised address in which everyone thought that, you know, finally this would end his 37-year rule of Zimbabwe. And he remained completely defiant. So it looks like the country is in quite a bit of a crisis, but luckily there hasn't really been much bloodshed so far. But what we're really looking at is a power struggle happening in the governing party in ZANU-PF, which Mugabe is no longer the leader of, but he's still the president of Zimbabwe. And so, you know, this is a very important moment. You know, this is really going to look like the end of an era for Zimbabwe. But whether or not we're going to see sort of systemic democratic changes, it's not quite so obvious, because it's one thing to kind of remove the head of a regime, but to remove the body, which is, you know, the governing party, the political culture, that doesn't happen overnight. So this could be a new direction in Zimbabwe's history, but it's very important that the people make it that way, because a lot of the actors involved at the moment are people that have been in the political elite in Zimbabwe for a very long time. So it doesn't look entirely possible that we will see that kind of systemic change.
No one wants one dictator to be replaced by another.
One.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, the deadline for Mugabe to go actually is at lunchtime today. Impeachment could begin as soon as tomorrow. Sebastian, let's move on to the Mirror. Blue on blue.
This is back to the budget coming up on Wednesday. Obviously, the big exciting fiscal event of the season, if you like that sort of thing, which thankfully I do. And this is all about defence spending, and the MOD has to fill a £20 billion black hole. This is a challenge for the new Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson, who took up that role following the resignation of Sir Michael Fallon a couple of weeks ago. You've got a host of grandees here: Sir Malcolm Rifkin, Sir Gerald Howarth, two Knights of the Realm, as well as some former ministers, basically saying do not slash the MOD's funding, particularly at this time, given the threats from North Korea, South China Seas, Russia, cage rattling, cyber attacks. This is not really the time, they're saying, and this is a very core thing for the Conservative Party. You know, they're protecting defence and national security is something the whole party is very keen on rallying behind. And you always get this before budgets, people using newspapers and the public platform to make a bid for their particular, you know, pet projects in this way. But I think there is a really key point here that ever since the Brexit vote and the pound took a massive hit, a lot of defence kit has become a lot more expensive. For example, the F-35 fighters, which are to go on our new aircraft carrier, they've increased significantly more money. So this is a real one to watch out for on Wednesday.
Yeah, everyone asking for more money, but where is it going to come from? We shall find out from the Chancellor, of course, as you say, on Wednesday. Stay with us. Lots more from Inside the Papers coming up next. We're continuing the papers with Sebastian Payne and Dalia Gebrial. And Dalia, you have found a story in The Sun. This will be of interest to anyone who's thinking about doing their Christmas shopping in the next few days.
Well, the key is not to be fooled. Turns out the corporations are lying to us. Who knew? 60% of Black Friday deals are the same price or cheaper either side of the sale.
Wow.
So,
it's Black Friday this Friday, isn't it, I think? This
yes,
Friday coming?
Yeah, and notorious for scenes of violence and,
rampage and
drama, but turns out it's not necessary because it's the same price all year round anyway.
So the key is don't get fooled by those adverts that sort of maybe hold out until the week after. OK, and Sebastian, oh yeah, this is interesting. Boatface is back in the news.
Yes, obviously we remember that from last year, that the new Arctic marine vessel, which is actually named the Sir David Attenborough, it turns out it's being built, but there's not many British folk actually building it, according to The Sun, which is saying that there are only 5 welders and plasterers were behind this, and they were mostly Romanians and Polish labourers because they're paid less. So, as The Sun have put it, I named this Boaty McBucharest, and it reminds me last week of Doncaster Council, which was looking for names for its new gritting machine, as well as Basil Salty, Usain Salt, Gritney Spears. We had Gritty McGritface was on the list as well.
Was it?
Yeah, but it didn't make it.
Why does anyone put out a competition to name anything?
Well, if you had to name it, it would be Sky McSkyface. I don't know.
It could well be, couldn't it? Thank you both very much. Stay with us. We'll see you again next hour. Right now, though, we're going to take a look at today's weather. With us this morning to review our Monday morning papers, our political writer for the Financial Times, Sebastian Payne, also Dalia Gebrial from the student campaign group People and Planet. Hello again, nice to see you both. Dalia, let's start with the front page of The Guardian. Hammond ruling out $4 billion of emergency cash, pounds of emergency cash for the budget.
Yes, so I mean, this is really devastating. The NHS is our most prized institution and we're seeing it just crumble before our very eyes. Spending on the NHS is really popular. Brexit was won on the promise of a 350 million extra, pound increase in injection into the NHS. And fundamentally, the NHS costs money. And we're seeing Philip Hammond sort of repeatedly dismissing calls from the NHS chief executive for more funding, particularly with the winter coming up. And fundamentally, do we believe the, Philip Hammond who's sort of gaff after gaff after gaff, or do we believe the doctors and nurses who are running our NHS? I know who I believe.
But the problem is, isn't it, and we were talking about this earlier, in the run-up to a budget, everyone shouts loudly about wanting money. We know that nurses and doctors are on their knees desperate for more cash, but at the same time, any teacher will tell you that their school needs extra funding. We know that money needs to be spent on research and development.
Of course, and I think, the questions that I have for this government is, what do they choose to spend their money on? This is the point, is that budgets and funding are choices, and we see £1 billion dropped for the DUP in a minute. But when it comes to, the fact that the BMJ has just released a report saying that 45,000 unnecessary deaths have been caused directly by the austerity policy of the Tories in a 4-year span, we've got to ask ourselves, what are the decisions that this government are being made? Are they being made in the interest of their own political stability or their own political life, or in the interest of the long-term future of this country, particularly at this huge turning point we see with Brexit?
I don't think that's really quite fair. It's not money for the DUP, it's money for Northern Ireland, which has got terrible infrastructure, huge poverty problems, and the money that's going there as part of the DUP coalition is going to help that. Yes, it was done for political expediency, but I don't think you can say it's not just wasted money, it's money that will be put to very, very good use. And the simple fact is we've still got huge amounts of debt. Philip Hammond's not going to close the deficit until the mid-2020s at this rate. So, the defence needs money, NHS needs money, schools need money, but the fact is we can't keep borrowing money because, it's going to be passing it on to future generations. So there are very tight fiscal framework the Chancellor has to work in here while trying to maintain business confidence in the country after Brexit, because if he just starts turning on the spending taps, then that will make the country look like a joke and we'll lose confidence in our economy.
Which brings us nicely onto the fact that there's also the Brexit bill to pay for, and we know that the Prime Minister is due to meet key cabinet colleagues a little later on today. We're thinking that the Brexit divorce bill is going to be top of the agenda. How are the public going to react if they suddenly hear that the Prime Minister is planning to spend maybe another 20 billion euros on getting out of Europe?
Not very well, I think, in terms of things you want to spend money on.
Exactly.
It doesn't look great, but I think you've got to remember a lot of this money's already in the budget, because so in terms of the first 20 billion euros, that's already in there. That's priced, so it's not actually spending new money. But I think the issue that you do have is that the only amount that people think really does work is about 10 billion euros. And so as soon as you start to get these bigger and bigger numbers, people are going to say, hang on a minute, I voted for Brexit, I didn't see this big bill being signed off here. But the fact is, the May government knows it has to sign it, because if it doesn't sign away this money, there won't be a transition deal, we'll fall out of the EU, and that would really risk an economic shock and throw us into a depression that would have far more damage for public services.
OK, interesting takes. Let's move on to a story in the Times, Dalia. Trans teenager voted in as a Labour women's officer.
Well, I mean, this really shouldn't be a story because trans women are women, so it makes total sense that, it's shocking that it's taken until 2017 for a trans woman to take up a position such as this. It's a Labour women's officer. Unfortunately, we've been seeing a huge campaign of scaremongering, of misinformation, and really preying on people's fears, which is the exact kind of thing that we saw with, the gay rights movement, for example. But really, we're seeing a lot of, backlash, but we're also seeing a lot of successes, like the election of Lily Madigan in the Labour Party, but also things like, the Virginia State Legislature has just elected their first trans woman, and that was after a huge campaign of scaremongering about trans bathrooms. So whilst we're seeing, a lot of negative scaremongering press, we're also seeing a huge fight back from the trans community. And I'm really sure that, in 10 years, we're going to look back at this exactly how we look back at the gay marriage debate and think, why on earth did it take so long?
Why were we even discussing it? Yeah. Just very briefly, Sebastian, moving away from negative stories to positive stories, and the 70th wedding anniversary of the Queen and her consort.
Yes, Prince Philip and Her Majesty are all over the papers today because today is 70 years since they were married. And one of the most extraordinary stats I saw in one of the papers today is that they've been I think it's 2 million a year into the UK economy here, which, all these debates you always get on, are the royals still relevant? Are they still a good thing for the country? Then clearly they are. And if you think about the span of social change that have happened in their lives, you're talking about the transgender debate and that on side, that would be totally unthinkable when these two were first married 70 years ago. And if you want to see the whole thing chart, then obviously The Crown starts again, so you can watch that and see it right from the beginning.
A statistic I heard yesterday, which was interesting, or a fact rather, was that the new stamps that have been brought out to commemorate the 70th wedding anniversary, they're a first-class stamp, 65p now. When they got married, the year they got married, a first-class stamp would have been tuppence halfpenny.
Wow.
It just brings it home, doesn't it? Thank you both very much. Stay with us. We're going to talk about some of the stories from inside the papers next. We continue our look at your Monday morning papers with Sebastian Payne and Dalia Gebrial. And Sebastian, I love this story in the Daily Express. Still going strong. A couple put faith in white goods from the 1950s.
Yes, so following on from the royal family's 70th anniversary, we have Sydney and Rachel Saunders here, who are putting up for sale 3 appliances they bought 62 years ago when they were married. You've got a tumble dryer, a washing machine and a cooker. And remarkably, they're all still in working order, except the washing machine does have a slight leak, and we've got Sydney saying that who's a retired accountant, and things were made much better in those days, although things are more sophisticated now. I think they would be right. If you look at the cooker and the washing machine here, I don't think you'll get a particularly fast spin dry or grill on that. But
my in-laws have got a kitchen from the 1960s, that the whole kitchen, all the units are tin. and they're all metal, and it's beautiful. It's very pristine. They say it's sort of antique. I say they need to rip it out and put something nice in from IKEA.
Well, the thing I really want to know about the story is, have they been using these for 62 years? Or did they just keep them in their garage to get a sort of, to seize on the moment, to get featured out of them?
Maybe. I mean, a museum or something would probably be very grateful for those. Dalia, tell us about this museum.
Yes.
A lot of old appliances, something a bit more depressing.
Yeah, well, so two Croatian artists have set up a museum of breakups, museum of failed relationships, which I'm gutted because that was going to be the name of my memoir. So, it's basically people from across the world are sending in their mementos from their breakups. So we have things like a gifted copy of a weight loss book, which, you're just asking to be dumped,
really?
aren't you? An X-ray, letters, and I think, we can look at this as being really depressing, but also, this is a universal part of life, and I think, it's good for us to kind of find different ways to process this, but also, funny things like a toaster with a note saying, when I moved out and across the country, I took the toaster. That'll show you how you're going to toast anything now.
Well, maybe given that the Queen and Prince Philip are celebrating 70 years together, they should open a museum next door celebrating longevity in relationships and marriage. That would be a good way to go, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I just wonder who would actually go to this museum, though, because, particularly if you've sort of come out of a relationship, it might be a bit of a depressing place to go as well. So I think you're right. You have two doors. You can go through the breakup or the long marriage one, and depending on your mood, you can decide which museum you want to see.
You wouldn't go for a date, would you?
Not so much.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Unless you've got a big old relationship you really want to get off your chest. Look, my last relationship was really bad, but look at all these ones in this museum.
I know, incredible, isn't it? Thank you both very much indeed. Do stay with us for the next hour. We'll go through some more stories. Good to see you. Right now, though, we're going to take a look at the weather details. Isabel has that for us. Hello again, with us this morning to review the papers. Political writer for the Financial Times, Sebastian Payne, also Dalia Gebrial from the student campaign group People and Planet. Sebastian, let's start with this from your paper, the Financial Times. The headline, May promises R&D spending boost. Now, lots of people will read this headline this morning. They're perhaps nurses or teachers or people who are using food banks or people who perhaps are living in substandard rental accommodation, and they'll say, what on earth is the Prime Minister doing, pumping billions into R&D when we're struggling with far more urgent matters?
Well, the aim of this announcement is to try and lay the foundations for more growth in the future, and that the government really sees science and technology as a good basis for getting much more future growth in new industries, growth industries, where Britain can have a competitive advantage, because our university sector is world class. We have a great skills base in things like new materials such as graphene and battery technology, and this is what it's all about. So today we're going to see Theresa May and Philip Hammond not in a driverless car as we thought they might be today. But
that would be a PR gaffe, wouldn't it?
No.
The headline writers would have a huge amount of fun with that tomorrow.
Yeah, there's a great cartoon in the Times which has got a driverless car going around in circles, so I think they already foresaw that and shut that down. But they're going to talk about an extra 2.3 billion of spending in the last year of this Parliament. So that's still quite a long way away, and the problem with this is that the public finances are still so constrained, and Philip Hammond's going to be told on Wednesday by the Office for Budget Responsibility, you ain't got that much money left to spend. So you can talk about a spending boost, but that's so far away. That's 5 years away. It doesn't really make that much difference now. This really just paints what a difficult position the government is in. They want to spend, they want to ease upon austerity. They'd love to give money to the NHS and to other public sectors, but they just can't see a way of doing it if they still want to make the books balance by the middle of the 2020s.
What sort of budget do you think we're going to see, Dalia? Do you think we're going to see the exciting budget that many are calling for, or do you think we're going to see something that perhaps is more cautious?
Well, I mean, I have to disagree. I think we're going to see a lot more of the same things, and I think that we actually have a lot more choice than we think we do. And in terms of this investment into research and development, it looks really, really good on paper, particularly with Brexit coming up. There's a lot of concerns about the higher education sector, which is a huge part of British culture and British society. But we've had 10 Tory U-turns since the election was called, from energy price, particularly on their more popular policies, so things like energy price caps and public sector pay caps. So we just hope that this isn't going to be the 11th U-turn.
Right, there was certainly a lot riding on the Chancellor this week, the budget on Wednesday. Full coverage here on Sky News, of course. Now, Dalia, let's head to a story that you found about sleeping squirrels.
Yes, so who knew that those pesky little squirrels at the bottom of your garden could help save lives? It says here that scientists have found that squirrels could help hold the key to helping stroke patients avoid brain damage, because when they hibernate, a protective process occurs in their cells, which allows their brain to function with reduced blood flow and oxygen, which is it's just incredible, isn't it? The way that we can draw these connections between, what's going on when a squirrel's sleeping and, something that affects 1.2 million people living in the UK with the after effects of a stroke. So it's probably still very early days, but this is a huge step forward by the looks of it, and also just makes squirrels even more adorable than they already
Adorable.
are.
Oh, the great squirrels, they're vermin. We've talked about this on Sunrise
so
many times. They're not
adorable.
adorable.
Oh, come on.
Red squirrels
Those bushy
are.
tails.
Well, if they're
You should try
helping
and have one in your garden.
advances in
I'd
medicine,
yeah.
perhaps you'll see them in a different light, Sebastian. Let's go to the Mail and cash point crisis.
Yes, so even though a lot of us feel like we don't actually use that much cash anymore, it's a very interesting story about the charges used on cash points. There's nothing more you hate when you get to a cash point and it asks you £1.25 or £1.50 just to get access to your money. But this squabbling over the fees about who should pay, is it the retailer, is it the banks, is it the consumer, is actually threatening ATMs. And the Mail is reporting that 1 in 10 towns and villages could lose their free ATMs. And I think particularly for retired people and those near the breadline, this seems like a really damaging thing to do.
But we are moving to a more cashless society, aren't we? And a lot of smaller retailers now are able to have cash machines, cards,
The ATM.
machines, which they didn't used to have access to, so you can pay by switch or whatever.
But the problem with that is, it's still about the fees, that
Yeah.
those machines come with fees. And if you've got an American Express card like I have, there's loads of places that won't take that because there's extra fees included on that. So it's the same kind of issue here again, of the role of banks versus the role of consumers here. But I think if you think of sort of the more sleepier parts of the country, it's really important to have ability for cash for paying for taxis or buying some food from the grocer or what have you. So I think banks need to watch really carefully to make sure every village does have at least one free cash machine.
Yeah, OK. Now, Dalia, we've talked about squirrels. Let's talk about spiders.
So this is an absolute nightmare for arachnophobes like me. I absolutely hate spiders, and it turns out that they're getting savvier, their webs are getting stronger, they're getting bigger. Absolute nightmare. I'm moving to the country where apparently they're smaller somehow. So garden spiders are evolving to spin lavish webs containing 9 foot more silk, which
Wow.
means that they're getting bigger because they're catching more food as well. So it's amazing again, but also kind of terrifying for me, because once I see a spider in my house, I'm on Twitter asking someone to get rid of it for me as I cower away in my bed.
Oh, you see, having lived in Australia, all those fears have gone for me.
No, I couldn't.
One step away from Spider-Man, I think, judging by these spiders.
All right, thank you both very much indeed. Great to see you this morning.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
your time. We're going to take a look at the weather now. Isabel has all the details for us.